Today we're going to talk about how to install 4 Z steppers on the Bigtree Tech GTR version 1.0 using the M5 version 1.0 as well. So this is going to be somewhat of a long tutorial to explain a very simple process, but let me first explain the steppers. So we have our X stepper, our Y stepper, our Z stepper, our E0 stepper, our E1 stepper, our E2 stepper, our E3 stepper, our E4 stepper, our E5 stepper, our E6 stepper, and our E7 stepper. Now the first one being E0 is going to be our extruder by default. So anything that we add for an additional Z is going to start after E0. So our first extruder is exempt, so it's going to be E1, 2, and that should cover it because we have Z, then we have E1, E2, and then E3. So what we're going to have to do first is jump the two boards together with the connector cable. So I'm going to do this real quick. It's just matching up the notched connectors. Next, we're going to have to investigate what the actual jumper configuration is for UART because we're using TMC 2208s. And if you haven't noticed already, some of them have fins and some don't. This is just an example configuration. If I were to run it as a regular configuration, I would put cooling fins on everything and run a fan on it. But for this case, we're just going to set it up to see if we can configure it. So the first thing we need to do is go over to the web browser and find out what the actual configuration is that we need to set for the jumpers. So I'm going to go over to the GitHub page for Bigtree Tech, and I'm going to go to repository. Inside repository, I'm going to do a search on GTR, and that'll bring us to the configuration. Inside here, I'll open up the manual for it. And inside the manual for the GTR, let's see, we'll start with operating instructions. We're going to find out what the jumper configuration is. So I'm going to scroll down kind of quick just to find it. Note that when you are running it, you're going to have this not in USB power up mode, but you're going to have it in 1224 volt mode. And in this case, I'm running on a power supply that's 12 volts for this example. So I'm not going to show you the configuration in the advanced configuration for setting your power supply voltage to optimize the steppers. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit more here. And we're going to find the configuration somewhat deep in here. So we're probably going to come across step dir first. This is step direction. This is not what we're using. We're using UART. So here it is, UART mode, and the jumper config is right here for each. So we need to adjust our jumpers. So I'm going to go back over to the board and change that. So I'm going to pop first the jumpers off on the Z axis. There we go. Then I'm going to do E1, which is our second extruder normally. Then I'm going to do E2. And then I'm going to do E3. So now that we've got all these cleared, we need to put the jumper in the correct position. So it's the black jumper pins right here. So we're going to push that down. Then we're going to do the same for the other ones. So we'll go over to the Z axis and do the same. And note that I have the jumpers in right now so that we can run one motor. Otherwise, this will not work. Then I'm going to go to E1. And then I'm going to do E2. And so that'll be our jumper configuration. Now what I'm also going to do is plug in the motors first because it gets kind of difficult to align these. So I'm going to use the notch connector on this one. And also keep in mind I'm not using matched actual steppers, so this might get a little weird. 3 of them are matched and 1 is not. So that's the next one. And then we've got E2, which is right over here. And then we've got the very last one. Now this one might have a slightly different wiring because the connector is DuPont, so it might not click in as well. So now that we have that set, we're going to actually put these in place. So as you can see, it's red on one side, black on the other. That means that we need to match the red and the black. So we're going to slide it in for ours on the Z axis. Then we're going to do E1. Then we're going to do E2. And in the next configuration video, I'll show you how to do the fans. So let's do the last one. So we've got that configured. Now we need to configure the software or firmware for the board. But before we do that, I'm actually going to connect the power to the board. So there's 2 different power connectors over here that we have to worry about. There's one for the actual motor power and there's one for the board logic. And notice how I marked red on the screws that have voltage and black on the screws that have ground or no mark at all. So in this case, the black is kind of rubbed off where I marked it, but that's just a way for me to tell how not to damage the board when I connect my connections. So that's the power for the actual steppers. Now let's do the board logic power, and we'll double check this in the pinouts on the browser before we even apply power, because it's a good way to avoid damaging your equipment, is always double check before you actually power it up. So these are done. So the other power that we have to worry about is the power on the M5 board, because power does not run through this cable. So we're going to have to use a different type of connector. So what I'm going to have to do is actually modify that connector by grabbing some crimps and then crimping it, because I want to use DuPont connectors in this connector for safety. So I'm going to grab some DuPont connectors. This may take a few seconds for me to get them lined up here. So the ones that I want to use are probably this size, and I'll put the links to this on my webpage. It's probably easier for people to find, and I can consolidate links for you, but that'll be coming out in the future. So the first thing I need to do is get 2 tools. First tool is actually the wire cutters and strippers, and the other one is the actual ferrule crimp. This is for safety. So what I'm going to do is grab the actual ends of this and modify it. So I'm going to take the crimper, I'm going to then cut it, and I'm going to cut the other one over here, and I'm going to also strip it in a second. I just want to cut it away from the board so that I don't damage the board by accident. Then I'm going to have to strip these. So I'm going to put them in the wire strippers, and I'm just going to expose the metal a little bit. That's probably too much on the ground, but I'll do the other one real quick here. So now they're both exposed. So I'm going to take the ferrule and I'm going to slide it on, and I'm going to turn it as I put it on. Then I'm going to take the wire crimp for the ferrule connector, and I'm just going to slide it in there and then crimp down nice and hard, and that should stay on nice and good. Now if it doesn't, you may have to adjust the screw over here with the little sprocket to make it crimp better. So I'm going to do the second one real quick here. I'm going to slide this over again. Hopefully you can see it. And now they're both crimped. Now I would normally put colors on these, one for red over the yellow and then one for black. But this is just an example to show you what's going on. So we need to slide this in here now. And then we're going to bolt this down as well. So I'm going to tighten this down. That should be good. Let's do the other one. And now that's safely set up. So now that we have that configured and we have all the power connections made with the power supply off, what we're going to do next is we're actually going to load the firmware. So I'm going to have to pop out the actual drive over here, and I'm going to have to use a device to actually add it right here. So I'm going to slide the actual drive in here, then I'm going to add this to my computer so we can actually see the drive. Okay, now that we're on the computer, we can see, first we want to check some things real quick here. Up here I was talking about the pinout diagram. So I'm actually going to go back so I can show you a better one. If you go to pins, you can actually verify that it's, you know, voltage up here, ground down here, voltage up here, ground down here. That's important to verify. Same thing goes for the other board. So if we go over to the, well, they don't have the second one in there, so I already know what it is because there's actually silk screen on the board. But maybe we can find it in here, but I doubt it. So let's see if we can search on M5. I don't think we're going to find it, but we'll see. Well, it's in this folder someplace, so probably right here. So as you can see, it's positive on the right, negative on the left, which is how we have it set up. If we look at the workbench real quick here. So that's good. So let's go back over to the desktop for a second here on the computer, and I'm going to open up VS Code. Now I've already downloaded the latest Marlin firmware and extracted it. So I'm going to click on Explorer, then Open Folder, then Download, then Marlin 2.0, Marlin 2.0, then Select Folder. Inside here, we're going to give this a second to load. They've made some changes since my last tutorial. They've consolidated the INIs into a separate folder, so your platform.io.ini will now point at these folders. So we're going to have to actually find which folder our board resides in for the processor. And I'll show you that in a second. So let's minimize that for a second, and then we'll go over to the Marlin folder, then we'll go over to the source folder, the core folder, then boards.h, and we'll search on GTR_, and that'll bring us to our board type, and so we'll copy that. So now that we know where that is, we also know that it's an STM32M4F. That will tell us what folder we need to worry about for our INI. So if we go up here, it's probably this one, so we can search on GTR_V1, and there's our board. So it's one of these two. I would start with this one. If it doesn't work, try this one, but it's probably going to work on the very first one. So let's go back and start configuring for 4 steppers on the Z axis. So first thing we need to do is we need to go over to configuration.h, and we need to search on motherboard, and here we're going to paste over the ramps our board configuration. Then we're going to change the serial port to -1. Then we're going to search on A4988. And as you can see, they defaulted these to on now, so we're not going to worry about these too much, but we're going to have to enable the other things that we're using for Z. So as you can see, there's Z2 here, Z3. These are actually the extruder ports. That's what they're actually pointing to, and that's why E0 is probably in use. So that's the max that we can do. So now we need to change it to our stepper type, which is the TMC2208. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it for our Z, Z2, Z3, and Z4. Now that we have that set, we could configure this, but I've shown you so many times how to work with this, and I'm going to skip that for time reasons. But I'm going to go over to advanced config, and I'm going to turn on TMC_debug so that we can check these. And so we have to turn this one on. This gives us G codes to work with, and the other one, which is down here. So there's two that you need to search on and remove the comments. We're not going to configure the actual configuration for the steppers because you've seen me do that before. So what we need to do is look for dual steppers. It might be steppers dual. So I'm going to search on dual stepper, and hopefully, like it did this case, it brought us to where we need to be. So the number of Z steppers is currently 1. We're going to change that to 4. So that should take care of our needs for this. Now I did talk about modifying the 12 volts to optimize. As you can see, this is where you'd actually modify it for your power supply. I'm skipping that at the moment because it's not relevant to this particular tutorial, but it may be relevant to you. So now that we have that set up, let's set up our platform.io.ini. So let's go over to first platform.io.ini, and we need to change our default environment. Now it's the Mega 2560 at the moment. So let's go over to the INI file that we had, which is probably this one, and there's our board. So I'm going to copy it. That's our default environment, and then we're going to go back to here and paste it. So to build, all we have to do is actually click on the build checkbox. But a little thing a lot of people don't know about is that the .pio has a default build in it. So we're going to clean that out first. So once this is clean, the .pio folder should be empty. So let's check that. There's nothing in there. So let's click on the checkbox. Now, one thing you might not understand is that the build may fail the first build. If it does, build it a second time, because certain things may be building out of order in your build. If it happens a third time, find the very first place where it fails and fix the error. So now that it's starting to build, let's check on the .pio folder. As you can see over here, it's starting to populate with our actual build. And you can see that there's a framework and other things are going on. It's still adding stuff as it's building. In a moment, we'll see firmware.bin pop into here if we're lucky. There it is. So to set this up, we're going to right click on it and we're going to go reveal in File Explorer. So inside here, you can see it, but let's check on the E drive real quick. We have 2 files in here. I'm just going to wipe these out. Those are from our original TFT drive. And we're then going to right click and send the firmware.bin over to that folder on that drive. It's actually on the root. So let's pop this out and go back over to the desktop to actually set it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in the drive over here, and before we set up everything for the actual load, we have to check our jumper. So I'm going to move this jumper over to direct power. Then I'm going to plug this in so you'll see a little light. Then I'm going to take the power and plug it in as well. And you should see the firmware start to load with a little flashing light. And once that's complete, we'll hear a beep, which we just heard. So we're going to go over to Pronterface for a second. And inside Pronterface, as you can see right now, I have it open, but it says COM port 1. So we're going to need to check to see which COM port it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Device Manager, and I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to go over to my COM ports, and it says 14. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to click over here and change it to 14, and then connect. So now we're going to check to see if the stepper drivers are okay by typing M122 and pressing enter. And as you can see, they're all okay. So what we're going to do next is we're going to actually test to see that the actual steppers work. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move the x-axis 10. So as you can see, they're now turning, but one of them is turning in the wrong direction. What that means is that the actual DuPont connector is connected backwards, and that's what's causing that issue. So I want to take a moment to thank my patrons for their support, and also the people on PayPal. It's greatly appreciated, and it helps offset the cost to make these tutorials. And everyone, take care, be safe, and remember to get vaccinated.